Like so many of you, I have struggled with a chronic illness and the subsequent loss and fear, anxiety, and isolation that comes with it. I too have spent years and lots of money trying to find some sort of answer to what I was experiencing. Hi, you guys. I'm Katie. I'm the head coach at Reorigin. We are a neuroplasticity-based brain retraining program that helps you heal from your symptoms of chronic illness. I'm super honored and excited to share my story with you, how I overcame my chronic condition with the use of brain retraining and neuroplasticity, and just a little bit more about me in general as head coach at Reorigin. In this next video, I connect with Natalie. She's our coach and community manager at Reorigin. If you have any questions, feel free to leave comments below and I'll be more than happy to answer them.
What a joy that I get to do this. So lots of people have, obviously heard about Ben's story and how and why Reorigin was created, and mine as someone that's healed through using Reorigin. And now we get to hear about how you applied for the position of head coach and your lead up to what brought you to Reorigin and that position in the first place. So before this, you kindly sent me some notes for me to read about your background story, which I was really moved and I found it really interesting because I didn't actually know much of what you had sent through to me personally.
Yeah.
So I just want to start by taking us back. The first thing that struck me was that you were diagnosed with epilepsy when you were about 15 years old, which must have been, as a 15-year-old, really difficult. So if you don't mind, we'll just start by talking us through that and how it felt and how, as a 15-year-old, you coped with a really serious diagnosis and what impact that had on you mentally.
Yeah. Honestly, like, now as an adult, when I can look back on it and after all of the work that I have done, I can see that that was a very traumatizing experience. And without, like, you're a kid, you're 15, you don't know what, is trauma or anything like that. And so just looking back on it, whenever I reflect back on it, I can recognize, like, oh man, that was actually a really big deal, something that I went through. And so, yeah, just to talk a little bit about it. As a young kid, my health was always fine. Like, I never really had any health issues. So around 15, right, but it was right around before I turned 16, I started having grand mal seizures out of nowhere. Like, we had no idea where they came from. Unfortunately, the very first one I had, my brother had to witness it. Like, he was the one that was there. And so very, like, traumatizing for him too, but they really came out of nowhere. And I started with one, went to the emergency room. The doctor was like, this happens to people. A lot of, like, people have these sometimes. And so we're not worried about the first one. It's just your brain kind of shooting off some weird, signals. And then basically kind of said, like, if it keeps happening, then we will do an MRI and EEG, all of the neurological testing. We'll get you on medication and everything like that. So unfortunately, they did keep happening, not at a super frequent rate, but they would happen once a month for quite a while. And so we started, doing all of the tests. I had to do a lovely MRI, and that was before they had the open MRI. So, like, I was, tucked in there real tight and did EEGs and sleep studies and all that kind of stuff. And everything came back normal, which is so similar to so many of our members' stories, that we did all of the testing and everything was considered idiopathic. So they diagnosed me with idiopathic epilepsy. They told me this is actually really common for adolescents as you're growing and hormones are changing and all that kind of stuff. It's actually normal to develop this. And usually in your early 20s, you'll grow out of it once your body kind of stops transitioning so much. So yeah, it was very traumatizing. It was really hard, especially, like, in the United States, you turn 16, you're supposed to be able to drive, but you actually, it's technically illegal to drive if you've had seizures within a certain time frame. So I couldn't drive. All my friends were learning how to drive, and my mom was still taking me to school. And it was really, I consider the word embarrassing quite a bit. It was embarrassing as a kid. So yeah, it really kind of set me up to create this negative association with this condition, right? Because I was like, I just can't be a normal kid like all the other kids. So without even me really recognizing, I had created this very negative association, and I did not cope well. I did not cope at all. I didn't know how to cope. I was a teenager. I wanted to be normal and live my life. So I tried my best to be normal. So I really wasn't coping very well with it at all.
So from that, like saying you're not coping very well, you mentioned on that you actually went in and out of therapy from
Mhm.
around that those teenage years. Was that mainly because of that diagnosis? Because you missed out on so much as a kid, or was it other things that contributed to that too?
It was a lot of things. It was, again, when I look back at it now, I think that that was probably the main contributor. But I also kind of went in and out, just kind of like feeling alone as a young kid and not feeling like I really belonged. And obviously, something like that makes you feel like an outsider. And so I tried my best, to kind of understand what was going on and get pretty much, as a young kid, you're just like trying to get some validation and feel cared for. And so a lot of it was just me feeling very isolated, which again, like so many of our members experience that at Reorigin. And so I felt different than everybody else. I felt isolated. I couldn't drive. So I didn't have like a lot of, I didn't have at least that connection with my friends. So yeah, I kind of started therapy at that age around 16, 17, just to help me, yeah, cope with all of that stuff that was going on. I also moved when I was in high school, that was really hard too. Obviously, it contributes a little bit more, and that I don't, that doesn't really have much to do with my illness, but it was something that kind of like further isolated and disconnected me for sure.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And you haven't mentioned the word anxiety, but I imagine that, that must have caused a lot of anxiety, all of those things all building up within
Yeah,
school.
again, as a kid, I don't think I even recognized it as anxiety. I think I didn't have the words or the language, you know. Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that. I know that my mom had a lot of anxiety. She very much was like obviously you're a mother with a kid with a health condition, like you're going to become a helicopter parent. And so I think her anxiety created anxiety in me, but mine was more of like a pushback, right? As a teenager, we're pushing our limits and wanting more independence, but then you're in this place where you can't have more independence. So there was definitely like a weird power dynamic between me and my mom. And I think what ended up happening was because I felt so much of her anxiety, I actually tried to like overcompensate and be like, no, I'm not worrying. I'm not letting this affect my life. I'm just going to be a normal teenager as best I can. So it's a really interesting dynamic to think about.
I hear you. So, from being a teenager, am I right in thinking that as a youngish adult, you went straight into working as a high performance coach? So, a really demanding job.
Yeah, so actually, after I finished college, I worked in the physical therapy field. So I was a PT assistant. That's what my college degree is in. So I was working with people with chronic pain, post-surgical, like all that kind of stuff, which very demanding on its own. I was working 10-hour days in a clinic, commuting to work, all that kind of stuff. And I did that for about 7 years. Yeah, I did that for 7 years, and I had no issues, no health issues. My seizures were gone by then. I was even off of medication by then. Like, though that was a distant memory for me as a young adult, which was a blessing. And also makes, kind of like my story as I get older even more interesting. But yeah, I was working in a high stress environment with long days, and I was like putting my hands on people who were in pain, and what we know neurologically is like touch is a very powerful thing. So not knowing how to kind of like free myself of that energy, I think a lot of it built up and caused me, I got burnt out. I quit my PT job. I didn't have another job. I just quit because I was way too burnt out, and I was like, figure out I'll figure something out. And then that's when I fell into becoming a high performance coach, which was definitely demanding in its own right. But I got to work from home. So I at least didn't have to commute and deal with all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, like Wow. Okay. I didn't know you did that for so long. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that takes us up to kind of around 2020 when you again started having
Mhm.
similar symptoms from when you were a teenager, seizure type symptoms. So looking back, when those similar symptoms happened, what was the kind of earliest signs that indicated that it might be your limbic system on overdrive? Or how did you
Yeah.
initially interpret those symptoms coming back?
Yeah, I mean, it actually took me a while to discover that this was like a hyperactive nervous system and limbic system at the beginning. It's so interesting because when they first started happening, all of that anxiety that I didn't allow myself to feel when I was younger, it felt like it came just rushing in. Like the original, luckily, I didn't end up having any grand mal seizures. I never lost consciousness or anything like that. But the original, it's called an aura in epilepsy or seizure terms. The original sensation that I had when I was younger, I started having that same sensation, and that lasts for like a split second. And it's basically kind of like a signal of like, hey, you know, your brain's doing funky stuff. And then when I was a kid, it would progress into a full seizure. And then as an adult, thankfully, it never progressed, knocking on wood still. But because I had had that same signal as a kid and then I started having it as an adult, immediately my brain made the association and made the meaning. And that is when I know for sure that my limbic system like went into hyper drive. I initially, like thinking back at my response, know that I went into fight where I was like, okay, I need to call the doctor immediately. I need to do all of these tests. I need to figure out what's going on. I need to go to a naturopath. I need to, you know, do my blood work, supplements, like so many of our members do. I went into fight mode. I went into fix it mode. And as we all know, that doesn't help anything, you know, to really like go into that fix it mode because it just keeps us in that hyper vigilant state. I was constantly scanning my body for signs or symptoms of, you know, those sensations coming again. I quit work. I didn't, well, for the time being. Again, I had very flexible work, thankfully. So, you know, I stopped coaching for a little bit. I was also a personal trainer and I was working in a gym. And so I stopped working there because I became very hypersensitive to light and sound, and the gym was a very loud place. And so I completely pulled back from life altogether to focus on all of the doctor's appointments and all of the things and resting. You know, I was allowing myself to rest. I was sleeping like 12 hours a day, and I pulled back from life. I didn't exercise. I didn't go out with my friends. I became, you know, a hermit. I became completely housebound. And I can identify that that was based in fear because I was so afraid that something was going to trigger a seizure. And it felt so out of my control. And it was very, very scary. So I was in fight or flight constantly, even sleeping. I even had a hard time sleeping because I was afraid that, you know, my brain was going to shoot off these signals and I wasn't going to be able to do anything about it.
Absolutely. So I was reading kind of all of this makes perfect sense. And just kind of what you said leads on to the fact you said the harder you tried to get better, the worse you felt. So at what point was it that you actually realized that this was it? And kind of what mindset changes helped you stop pushing so hard?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's really interesting because, like I was saying earlier, I went to all the doctors and specialists and did all the tests. And I actually started seeing a naturopath, and she just wasn't the one for me, which is totally fine. But some of the things that we discussed in my sessions with her actually fed the fear. You know, she was very much saying like, this is EMF, like you have EMF hypersensitivity, you know, you have to check everything, right? You can't be an electric car. You have to check this, you have to check that, you know. And so I started really being afraid of EMF and avoiding it at all costs. But how do you avoid it, right? We can't avoid it. There's cell towers and there's this and that. We live in a modern world. And I got to this point where I spent so much time trying to avoid all of these triggering things and spending all of this money, which again, I know you understand, I know our members understand, like spending all of this money and just like fighting, tooth and nail just to have an answer, because I didn't even have a diagnosis. There was just an assumption. There was really no answer. And I don't know, I really don't know what happened. There just came this point where I was like, I can't keep trying so hard. Like, I'm exhausting myself. Again, I didn't really have the verbiage for it yet. I knew roughly of nervous system dysregulation. I knew of these things, but I just didn't even have the verbiage yet. But I was just like, I can't keep trying so hard. And so actually the interesting thing is I swung from fight mode into freeze. So then I think I just had exhausted myself so much that I completely shut down and was like, okay, I'm not trying anymore. Like, yes, I'm going to take the medication that I'm on, and that's it. And that's it. And I'm just going to like slowly start like getting back into life. And that was when I just started looking for new jobs, because like we talked about, my coaching job that I was in was pretty demanding. And also part of it was I was working with these incredible humans, but none of them, I couldn't connect with any of them because none of them had dealt with a chronic illness or any of those types of things. So I felt inauthentic. And so I started looking for other jobs. And that's when I just happened upon the job posting at Reorigin. I had been coaching, for, 3.5 years already. And I was like, all right, this is me. This sounds like me, like someone with this high level of anxiety and chronic illness. And it just felt like, wow, I can really make a difference here. So that is what brought me to Reorigin. And then really what brought me like digging into nervous system dysregulation, limbic system dysfunction. Again, I had the basis in the background because of, my degree is in, physiology in the human body. So, but then, as I started working at Reorigin, I just took it and ran with it. And I love it. It's absolutely incredible.
I'm just going to take us back before we go into your Reorigin. Because one thing that when you were saying about you stopped trying so hard, I just want to know, because a lot of our members always ask this, but how did you balance kind of staying informed, but also protecting your mental health at the same time? How did you get that balance right?
Yeah, I think what I had to do was, it was less about like figuring out the balance and more about kind of like identifying myself being the priority in my own life, and so like obviously we do need to stay informed, whether it be about current events or obviously like staying informed, I guess to a level about my illness, but still I go back to thinking like I am the one that can inform myself the most on my illness, like yes, there is research out there. Yes, there are studies. Yes, there are groups of people who, are experiencing the exact same, well, not even the exact same thing, but something similar. But like, I'm the one that knows most deeply about my body and my experience and my past experiences and all of that. So I kind of started to identify myself as the authority instead of outsourcing the authority to someone else or something else. Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. And going on from that, like for me, when I see you, I think boundaries, like you are the boundary queen.
Yeah.
The boundaries obviously helped play a really important part in your recovery. So how did you kind of determine, or how did you set boundaries like to influence your healing process? I noticed you said you allowed yourself to rest a lot. Was that one of the things you did?
I did. And also I was working on identifying the boundaries there too, because the rest, I can identify now that I was probably kind of leaning more towards that freeze or that royal state or that shutdown state, but I've been able to identify that and start to find the balance. But in order for me to get good at setting boundaries, I had to start with myself and honor those boundaries. I'm not perfect, right? I still don't honor all of my boundaries because I'm human, but I started with myself and then I worked outwards based on the people I felt safest with. So my friends, I feel the most safe with, a few of my close friends, and really identifying like, hey, this is what I can give. I don't have much right now, or like, I want to see you, but like, I can't, I'm not up for leaving the house. Can you come to me? And I will say having friends that are very supportive was really helpful in setting and honoring boundaries, because I know how tough it can be when you try to set a boundary and the person is like pushing back at you. So having those safe people that I could set boundaries with gave me practice. It gave me this ability to practice and get really good at it. And then I was able to gradually, incrementally expand out from there. Then I could set boundaries that felt a little bit more uncomfortable, like boundaries at work, at my personal training job, which I loved and I still love, to this day. I don't work there anymore, but the guy that owns it, I feel like a friend. We are friends, but there did come a point where I set the boundaries to say, you know what, this just isn't serving me. This very high level of activation isn't serving me. So I need to set this boundary here, and I need to focus on, the work that I can do that meets me where I'm at and also, makes a difference. So I started where it felt easy, and then I gradually, incrementally expanded out from there.
I love that. Amazing. Well done to you. You're so good at boundaries.
Thanks.
So, I'm just going to move it forward. So taking it back to Reorigin.
Yeah.
Is it the first time you came across brain retraining was through Reorigin when you applied for the job?
So brain retraining in this sense, yes. Now through therapy, I had done things like EMDR, cognitive behavioral therapy, somatic therapy, things like that. I had done those in the past, but I had never considered them under the lens of brain retraining. So yeah, this is coming to Reorigin was the first time probably that I had ever even heard the term brain retraining. Obviously, I knew about neuroplasticity. I knew that our brain could change, but just this actual practice of, what we do at Reorigin was really the first time I had encountered it.
Wow, incredible.
Yeah.
Then you started using, as you worked through Reorigin, you thought, I'll have a bit of that. I'll start doing some long forms myself.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, I started my own brain retraining. I started my own long forms. I started, interrupting the loops and just really reinforcing to my limbic system. Like for me, the biggest thing was reinforcing to my limbic system that my symptoms aren't dangerous and that my triggers, my sparks are not dangerous. So again, I had become very sensitive to sound and to light and to just overstimulation in general. And I had created this fear association that if I become overstimulated, something bad is going to happen. So I had to reinforce to limbic system, like, hey, that construction noise, not inherently dangerous. That person with the really loud car that doesn't have a muffler that's like screaming down the street, not inherently dangerous. Overstimulation in general, whether it be from like working out where my heart rate is elevated, I'm feeling flushed, that those things aren't dangerous. They're signals, yes, they're signs, and we can be curious about them, but the sign isn't you're in danger and something bad is going to happen. It's just my body responding to the outside world,
Love that. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I just want to finish off and asking, you obviously do lots of people's testimonials and we ask our members these questions. So I just want to finish off with a couple of those back at you. So what helped you the most when you were healing?
What helped me the most with my healing, I'll give you one like in terms of Reorigin, and I'll give you one in terms of like my own personal approach, which we also use in Reorigin. But in terms of the Reorigin program itself, what helped me the most was just really interrupting those thought loops, whether or not I was able to interrupt it right away, or whether I discovered it an hour later and then interrupted it then, like creating more awareness around my thoughts and how my thoughts were then impacting the physiology of my body itself was so powerful and so helpful. And again, this isn't like a toxic positivity thing either. I didn't interrupt and say like, everything's okay. I just was able to interrupt and say, hey, like this worry and this fear isn't serving this situation, right? It's handcuffing you. It's keeping you from being able to make a decision and move forward and do something that actually is going to help. So from Reorigin itself, that was the most helpful thing. And then for me personally, and I do talk about this a lot, you hear me talk about it, everybody does, just having self-compassion, having patience and self-compassion for my own journey was so helpful to just like say to myself, even on my bad days, like, hey, like you are doing the best you can. You are an amazing human being, you know, and I tell this to our members, but the people in Reorigin that are doing the work are in the 1% of the population, right? Because so many humans, simply because there's a lack of awareness, walk around on autopilot, you know, and everybody that's in Reorigin is making a conscious effort to know themselves better. And that should be celebrated. And we should have that compassion for ourselves because it's not easy. And so really having compassion for myself, for my journey on my hard days, like having more compassion and resting and eating well and drinking water and, you know, calling a friend or whatever I need to do was really helpful. And then also celebrating that like I am and was doing better than I ever thought, you know? Yeah.
Okay. And then what is one bit of advice that you would give someone thinking about joining us at Reorigin?
Ooh, my biggest advice would be you really have nothing to lose. So if you're struggling and wondering, you know, like, is this right for me? Or is this just going to be another one of those things that I don't follow through on? Is like, you have this opportunity to join Reorigin and to try it. And, you know, if it doesn't work for you, we have things in place that, you know, that can help you to either really like integrate the information more or just feel more empowered in the way you approach brain retraining. And also a big piece of advice is if you're going to do it fully, you know, to dive in 100%. And that doesn't mean you don't have to do it 150%, right? You don't have to go above and beyond, but to meet kind of like the requirements. I don't even like that word because we that are in Reorigin know that it's very flexible, but like if you're gonna do something, give yourself the benefit of the doubt that you can do it, that it can work for you, and do it fully for 30 days and just see what can happen would probably be my biggest piece of advice. And then just know that you really have nothing to lose. You know, you even if, you know, like you don't walk away and you're 1,000% cured and you're like walking on sunshine every single day, there still is such a benefit to retraining your brain. No matter what, there's a benefit to it. And it works for anybody, which is absolutely incredible.
I think that's more than one piece of advice, but
Sorry.
I will allow it.
What do you expect?
All right. So I was going to leave it, but I just have one more question in my head. And I want to just ask you, obviously I know the answer to this, but what is your favorite part of Reorigin?
You know the answer to this?
I think so.
I know the answer to this. I don't know. I have a couple of favorites. I do love the momentum groups. I love you're like, I knew it. I love the community. I love being in a group of people that are like, I literally get misty-eyed in groups sometimes with how uplifting our members are. And the reason I had a hard time, because like we see that in the community itself as well. We see that in the community forum. Like people just show up and they're so inspirational and they're so uplifting. Even as they are struggling, they're still there for everyone else. And like our community is unreal. I've honestly never seen anything quite like it. You know, so that's a testament to you growing the community. That's a testament to all of us, you know, growing the community and growing the momentum groups and everything. So that would definitely be my favorite. But I'm also going to say I really love when people post pictures of their dogs.
Okay. That is a perfect thing to end it with. Unless you have a good joke that you want to finish us off with.
A good joke. Okay, well, I'm just going to say this is being filmed around Halloween for anybody who watches this at a different date.
Yep.
I heard this joke yesterday in my momentum group, one of our members. And the joke is, what is a pumpkin's favorite sport?
I don't know. What is a pumpkin's favorite sport?
Squash.
Oh gosh. Very good.
Love it.
Good.
So good.
Katie, it's been an absolute pleasure to have this experience with you. And I thank you very, very much. And I'm sure everyone is going to love hearing your story and how you ended up becoming the best head coach there ever was.
Thank you, Nat. Hey everybody, if you liked hearing more about my story and how I became head coach at Reorigin, you will love hearing about Nat's story and how she went from chronic pain, depression, and rock bottom to being a coach and a community manager at Reorigin. Check it out next.